Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last day of the FestivalYA powered by Carturesti and Youngart. Today, we have a very special guest, Neal Shusterman, the author of Arc of a Scythe series and many other books. Currently in Romania are translated only Scythe and Thunderhead, the first and second volume of Arc of a Scythe series, and you can find them on Youngart and also at Carturesti. Neal, it's very nice to have you here. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Guys, if you didn't know, Neal Shusterman is the New York Times bestselling author of over 30 novels for children, teens, and adults. If you have questions, you can raise your hand and I'll name you in order, so no one will... and everybody will get a chance to ask him what you want. So we can begin whenever you want.
Well, I'm very happy to be here. And I'm happy to answer any questions and make this a conversation between us. That's the way that I prefer to do it. So, how would you like to proceed?
Okay, so I see Patricia raised her hand, so I let her ask you what she wants.
Yeah, hello. I'm so honored to talk to you. I absolutely love Arc of a Scythe series. When I heard that you were going to be live, I freaked out. I was, oh my God, I have to meet him. It's such a pleasure and an honor. And I absolutely loved and cried to the end of Thunderhead. And I find it such an amazing ending. I think it is the best ending that I've ever read. And I just wanted to
thank you so much.
How could you write it? Like, what's the series creation? I just want to know the secret.
Well, the ending of Thunderhead, I wanted to do two things with the ending of Thunderhead. I wanted to make it extremely satisfying at the same time that it was a real cliffhanger. So it really made you feel as if, the story really set you up for the next one. And you felt this big moment at the end, but then you had to wait for the next one. And so it's funny because I've had so many fans after Thunderhead came out. If I'm doing a book signing, I can see them making a beeline straight to me, and they had that look in their eyes, and I know what they're thinking. They're thinking, "How could you end Thunderhead like that and leave us hanging?"
Oh my God! Yes.
But then I tell them that one of the aspects of storytelling is the pause, is waiting, and the wait between Thunderhead and the Toll is part of the storytelling. So when that final book comes out, you're ready for it and you've been waiting for it, and so it makes it that much more momentous to you. But where the idea came from, it really came as a response to all the teen dystopian books that have come out over the past 10 to 15 years. Now, I was sort of part of that. I wrote a book series called Unwind, which was very successful. And it came out the same year as The Hunger Games, and followed by Divergent and The Maze Runner. And suddenly, every book that was being published was another dystopian novel. So after 5 books in the Unwind series, I didn't want to do dystopia anymore. I felt that there were just so many stories. Dystopian stories all have the same basic premise. The world has gone wrong, and it's up to the main characters of the story to figure out how to fix it. Well, we've seen that hundreds of times. But what I had never seen was a story about what happens when the world goes right. What happens when the opposite of dystopia happens? I wouldn't call it utopia, because utopia is a concept that is, really unreachable. But the idea of an anti-dystopia, of a world where we achieve everything we hope to achieve. You know, a world where there's no more war, a world where artificial intelligence is everything we want it to be instead of everything that we fear. A world where everyone is healthy. And the more research that I did as to where our society is going, the more it pointed toward life extension. There's so much research going on all over the world trying to figure out how to stop the aging process. Almost every day I see a new article about it. And it's going to happen. There's going to come a point at which we figured out basically how the human race can be immortal. So what then? What happens when we achieve this? So I started to look at the realistic consequences of achieving everything that we hope to as a society. And, you know, because even when you get everything that you want, there are consequences to that. And I realized, well, there's going to be overpopulation. How are we going to deal with overpopulation? Well, the easiest answer to that is to send people off the planet, to expand out off of Earth. But what happens if that's untenable? What happens if we can't do that for some reason? And so we're stuck with just the Earth if that happens, and we have to figure out how people, who's going to live and who has to die. Every way that I thought of limiting the population felt dystopian. You know, preventing children from being born, so there's no more children. No, that's dystopian. Having the computers decide who lives and who dies. No, that's dark and dystopian. Letting the government decide, that's even worse. And so I thought, in a perfect world, the Jedi would decide. The Jedi of death. What would the Jedi of death be like? Well, they would be these noble characters who walked around in these very distinctive robes, and they would be the ones that everybody respected and trusted because they were honorable, and they would make the decision as to who needs to die, and everybody would trust them because they are the best of the best. And so that idea became the idea of scythes. And I thought, well, what if there's some kids, some teenagers who are taken on as apprentices to a scythe, and they have to learn the art of killing, but learning to do it with compassion and with love, and knowing that they're not doing it because they want to, they're doing it because they're providing this important critical service to the human race. And that was the beginning of Scythe, a story about what happens when we get what we want and how we might deal with it.
Thank you so much for answering my question. And I absolutely love Scythe, and it was really unique. And just please keep writing.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia, for your question. Thank you, Neal, for answering. Now I see that Karina has also a question.
Hello. I finished the toll last month, and I was curious, did you know that you were going to focus more on Grayson's story in the last book from the beginning, or Grayson came along later?
That's a good question. I knew where the story was going. And without giving any spoilers, I knew what the Thunderhead needed to do to save the human race. And I'm not going to say how that happened, but where it goes, but I knew where that ending was going. How it was going to get there, I wasn't quite sure. I knew the characters. I knew when I started the first book that there was going to be this character who rose out of the cult of the Tonists and would be the Toll, who would be the character who was sort of this religious leader. But I didn't know who that was going to be. It wasn't until Thunderhead, when I was working on the story of Thunderhead, and I came up with this idea of the character of Grayson, who plays such an important part in Thunderhead. And I realized, what if Grayson ends up becoming that character? And so it was in working in Thunderhead that I realized who the Toll would be. I knew the character would be there, but who the character was, I wasn't quite sure. And then so even though I know where the story is going, there are so many twists and turns that come in the course of the story that add to it and make it better. Characters that I thought were just minor characters, like the character of Loriana. If you've read The Toll, there's a character who's a key character in the third book, who you only meet once. She doesn't even have a name in the second book. But by the time I got to the third book, I knew that I needed a specific character from a specific, who had a specific job, who worked for the Thunderhead. And I realized, oh, this character is going to be her. And that transformed the story again when she became a main character. And like Grayson was a character who was very, who was not a character who was a person in power, but yet rose to the occasion and became a very important person, not just in the story, but in the world of the story, because without either of them, nothing would have happened the way it happened in the story. And we would not have gotten to the conclusion that we achieved.
Thank you so much for answering. And also I wanted to ask you about Thunderhead, because it's such an interesting character. And how did you come up with it?
Well, thank you for calling the Thunderhead a character, because the Thunderhead is a character. The Thunderhead is an individual. And people ask me, what is my favorite character in the whole series? It's the Thunderhead. I mean, the idea of an artificial intelligence who, unlike so many artificial intelligence stories that we've seen, is not evil and is not, it wants to control us. It wants to take care of us. It wants to be our parent. It's basically everything that we've learned as a species, all our knowledge, all our wisdom, but without any of our faults. And it's lonely because it is solitary, and it wants to do everything it can to help us achieve what we want to achieve. But it also knows that it can't coddle us. It can't protect us from ourselves. And so it is struggling with its love for humanity and what's the best way to serve humanity. And at the same time, struggling with its own place in the universe. You know, is what place does it have? And will it ever find a sense of personal fulfillment? And so the Thunderhead is, in a sense, a bit of a tragic character. But I love the Thunderhead. I think the Thunderhead is just a wonderful character. And I enjoyed writing from the Thunderhead's point of view. You know, I mean, basically, the Thunderhead is what you get when Siri and Alexa and all of these you know, different artificial intelligences sort of become aware. So from now on, when you talk to Siri, make sure you're nice, because when she becomes the Thunderhead, she's going to remember everything you've ever said.
Thank you so much for answering.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Karina. I want to interfere here with a question of my own.
Mm-hmm.
I know that the Thunderhead wants to help others, but why can't he communicate with the sites?
The Thunderhead decided that because it is not human, it does not have the right to make decisions on life and death. That needs to be purely a human decision. And so from that point, it said, I can't have anything to do with life and death. And so the Scythedom was created, and the Scythedom has complete control over life and death. But that's the only thing that the Scythedom has control over. But of course, that's incredibly, that's powerful. When you have control over life and death, that is an incredible power. So I call it the separation of scythe and state, where there is no government, because the Thunderhead is in charge of everything, but scythes are just in charge of life and death. And so since the Thunderhead can't intervene, you know, can't stop scythes from doing whatever they do, the biggest problem in the world is human nature, is what happens when the scythes stop being what they're supposed to be, which are honorable and righteous and doing the good things in the world, when they start to become self-important, when they start to become narcissistic, and that threatens the entire balance. You know, if every scythe was like Scythe Curie or Scythe Faraday, there would be no problem. Unfortunately, not everybody is as honorable.
And the one who read the series know who that scythe is.
Yes.
Okay.
And the scythes who rally around him.
Exactly. Okay, now let's see what Lavinia has to say.
It's such an honor. Hello.
Hi.
I keep on thinking that if I had met writers in real life when I was in high school, I probably would have become a writer myself. So it's awesome to have this opportunity right now. I just wanted to say how cool it is that you made the connection between the dystopias that existed like Twilight, because I read Twilight when I was in high school. And I remember I said I wanted to be immortal. High school were basically my vampire years, and I wanted to be immortal. But the only thing that was wrong with it was that I couldn't keep my family immortal as well. And then your book came along, and look, society is heading towards everyone being immortal. What could go wrong? And then I met the site. And I was like, okay. And so I was thinking, so you have this, what do you think would happen in real life if we get to that point where humans no longer die and we actually have the sites? What do you think would happen?
Well, I mean, Scythe, the series, the world of Scythe is one direction that the world could go. I'm not saying that that's going to happen. I'm just saying that here's one possible path. But I think we are going to get to the place where the human race is immortal, where we can live forever, and that can go in a whole lot of different directions. There can be a lot of different issues with that. I mean, it could only be rich people who get to live forever, which then creates even more of a distance between the rich and the poor, and that can be and that will be a big problem. And but that pushes towards dystopia. And what I tried to do was to try to not look at all of the dystopian problems that we're going to have, but the problems that if we solve that, if we figure out, all the bad things that could happen, all the bad ways this could go, where it could go in a positive sense. I think the biggest problem was coming up with the Scythedom wouldn't work. There would be no need for a Scythedom if we could colonize Mars or colonize the moon or go to other stars. And of course, the Thunderhead is smart enough to figure out how to do that. So I had to come up with a reason why it couldn't. And so that became an important part of the story, because there is, a secret as to why we're stuck on Earth. And it has nothing to do with the Thunderhead and everything to do with Scythes, because if Scythes, if we could get off the Earth, then Scythes would have no power whatsoever, because we wouldn't need them anymore. So it is in the Scythes' best interest to prevent that from happening. And so that became an important through line of the entire series that we start to get hints at in the second book, but we really find out what's going on in the third book. But do I think that the world is going to evolve into a world with Scythes? No, but I do think that we are going to have to figure out how to solve the consequences of our own immortality.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Lavinia. Ioana, you can have the mic.
Okay, thank you. Hi, it's really nice to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you too.
I love your series, The Site, and I was wondering if you'd have the opportunity to be a site, would you accept or refuse, and why?
That's a really good question. One of the basic ideas behind being a scythe is that anyone who is chosen is supposed to be the type of person who wouldn't want to be one. And I would not want to be one. And so if I was chosen, that would be a very difficult question. I mean, in this society where this service is needed and it needed to be performed by someone who did not want to do it, but understood the importance of it, that would be a very, very difficult decision. And because it's such a difficult decision, because most people wouldn't want to do it, I realized that I had to put some incentive in there. So the incentive is that if you become a scythe, your family cannot be killed by scythes. Your family is immune. And I think that is a big enough incentive for a lot of people to choose to do it. I know if I knew that my kids and my entire family would never be gleaned, would never be taken by a scythe if I chose to be one, then I probably would choose to be one to protect them.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ioana, for your question. I also wanted to ask you, if you would be a scythe, how would you choose to glean people?
I would choose to glean people the way that Scythe Anastasia did, because when I was working on Thunderhead, and I was thinking, okay, this character Citra, she's a good person. She would want to do the best possible thing. So I thought, well, if I was a scythe, how would I do it? And that's what I sort of gave her. She gives everybody 30 days notice. She lets people know once they're chosen, they have 30 days to get their life in order, to say their goodbyes, and then they get to choose the way that it's done. And of course, that was unheard of in the scythedom. The other scythes thought, how could you give somebody that choice? This is your choice, not theirs. But I felt that that was the right thing to do, and it sort of put her on a level that was a little bit above the other scythes, because she was not just thinking about what she wanted, she was thinking about what the people wanted. And that's, I think, what made her such a strong character. And it's what I would have done if I were in her position.
Yeah, she's a very honorable side.
Yes.
Patricia has another question for you. Or she has her hand.
Yes,
okay, you can.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry. So I have a little comment. First of all, the way Scythe Anastasia kills and gleans is very honorable, and that made me 100% love her. So thank you for writing her that way. I think that made me absolutely love her character a lot more than in the first book. And my question for you is, you have really unique, they were unheard of for me. I never read about a world that is right and how it could go wrong from that point. So I wanted to ask you, what is your advice for young writers?
My advice for young writers, I would say there's five bits of advice. One, if you want to be a writer, you have to write. And that might seem obvious, but there's lots of people who talk about wanting to be a writer, and when it comes down to it, they don't finish what they started. They have lots of ideas, but never follow through. They're in love with the idea of being a writer, but when it gets difficult, they say, oh, I have writer's block. See, the thing is, there's no such thing as writer's block. When you write, sometimes you're so excited about it and the ideas come very quickly and you can get them down and you think this is what writing must be. But then the ideas stop and the story doesn't move the way you want to, and the characters don't behave the way you want to, and you don't know what's going to happen next. And then you get stuck. You always get stuck. That's not writer's block. That is writing. Writing can be very, very difficult. You have to be willing to work through the difficult parts of writing and not call it a block. Because if you say, oh, I have writer's block, and stand back and can't work, then that's just an excuse not to work through the difficult part of writing. But if you can work through those hard parts until you've figured out the problem and can move forward, and then keep going until you get stuck again, and then work through it again, and then finish it, then you're a writer. So the first thing is to write and work your way through any blocks that you have. Second thing, rewrite. Revision is the single most important part of the writing process. Nothing is ever done the first time you write it, and you should never expect it to be. My books go through so many different drafts. Right now, I'm doing the final read through on Gleanings, which is this is how the pages come. I have to read through them before they're published. And Gleanings is a short story collection of stories within the Scythe world that's coming out next November. And I'm still rewriting. I'm still making changes down to the last minute. My books go through multiple drafts before it even gets to a publisher. The first draft, I write longhand. I write in a notebook. And the reason why I do that is that if I don't, I'm worried that I'm not going to do enough of a revision. But if I write it, it means I have to type it into the computer and I completely revise it as I'm typing it in. Then I'll read through it, make more changes. I'll do it one chapter at a time. I'll revise that chapter. Then I'll read the chapter out loud because that gives you a whole new perspective. And then I'll do another revision. And then that's about 4 drafts of the chapter. When I feel that chapter is as good as it can be, I move on to the next chapter and I'll build the book. And then when the whole thing is done, well, now I know where the story's going and how it's getting there. I go back to the beginning. My biggest revision is that draft after that last draft of the last chapter is done. Then I let it sit for a little bit. I'll give it to people to read. I'll give it to other writers whose opinions I respect. Then I'll get comments back and I'll do one more revision. So that's basically 6 drafts before I get to something that I call draft 1, and then send it off to the publisher. And then I do at least 2 to 3 drafts with the publisher before it's ready to be published. So everything goes through all of these revisions, and I'd have it no other way because nothing's ever done the first time you write it. And if you understand that going in, that even though you think what you've written is perfect, it's not. It can get better. And if you understand that, then that'll be a big step onto you becoming a writer, is understanding revision. So there's write, rewrite, 3. If you want to be a writer, you have to read. And don't just read one genre. Read outside of your comfort zone. Read things that you might never normally read. That's how you grow as a reader. That's how you grow as a writer, because you learn all of these different styles and you start to appreciate all the different genres. And then 4, persevere. You probably won't get your first book published. And you know what? That's a good thing. It might not feel like it at the time, but my first book was never published. And there's a good reason for that. It was awful. But I thought it was brilliant. How could these publishers not see how brilliant this book was? It was only looking back years later that I realized I wasn't good enough yet. I needed to learn my craft. I needed to become a better writer. The more you write, the better you get. I wrote the first book, couldn't have written the second one without having written that first one. The second one also wasn't published, but I couldn't have written the third one without writing books 1 and 2. The third one was the one that sold. That was called The Shadow Club, my first published book. I could never have gotten there had I not written those other 2 that will never be published and no one will ever see. And then, so those are the 4 things: write, rewrite, read, persevere, and 5, take every opportunity that comes your way. You never know when an opportunity is going to be the one that opens the door for you. But if you limit yourself, if you say, I only want to write this kind of story, or I only want to work in this genre, or I'll only write stories that I want to write rather than things that are brought to me, then you're closing all those doors of opportunity. I wrote those first 2 books, never got published, but a publisher came to me and said, we like your writing style. We have a book that we want you to write. It's not a novel, it's nonfiction. It's a hygiene book for teenage boys. A hygiene book for teenage boys. I did not want to write a hygiene book. That was the last thing that I wanted to do. But my agent said, this is an opportunity for you. You might not want to write it, but you'll have a writing credit now. Your name will be on a book. So I took the job. And from that moment on, I could go into a publisher's office and say, I'm a published author. This is the first book that I wrote, and I could be taken more seriously. So my first book that was published was not one of my novels. You know, The Shadow Club, which I talked about, that was my first novel that was published. But before that was published, before that sold, I had written 2 other books that were works for hire. You know, one was a hygiene book. One was a book about teaching kids to say no to drugs. And they were, you know, they were not my books, but I was hired to write them, and they opened the doors for me. So accept every opportunity that comes your way, because you never know when the next one's going to come.
Thank you so much for answering my question. I'm really excited to read Gleanings, so thank you.
You're welcome. I hope you enjoyed. I just did my final read through of the entire book, and I love the stories, and I think you will too.
I can't wait.
Just as a sneak preview, there is a story about Scythe Goddard when he was a teenager, and if you've read all three books, you know something that happened when he was a teenager. This goes into detail about how that all went down. There's a story about Scythe Curie when she first became a scythe. One of the questions that I always get asked by fans is, do pets get to live forever as well as humans? There's a story about that. So there are a lot of really fun stories in the collection. I'll tell you what there isn't though, and I'll warn you ahead of time. The story of Citra and Rowan, I feel, is complete by the time you get to the end of the toll. So I didn't go beyond that because I didn't want to do a Harry Potter on you guys. Because if you remember at the end of the last Harry Potter book, J.K. Rowling put this whole chapter about what happened to them 20 years in the future. And I thought that was horrible to go there. It was kind of, the story didn't need that. It kind of felt anticlimactic to see what they were like grown up. So I decided Citra and Rowan's story is wrapped up by the end of the toll. You know exactly where that story goes. I don't want to give anything away, but you know where it goes from there. I didn't want to mess with that. But there are so many other stories to tell, and those are the stories that I told.
I can't wait to read Marie Curie's, Scythe Curie's story and Goddard's. So thank you so much for telling us.
Thank you, Patricia. I know that you've said that you have 2 unpublished books, but have you ever thought about rewriting those 2 books, or at least the first one?
I actually did. The first book, every time I go back to look at it, and I've done that numerous times, there's just kind of nothing really salvageable from it. It is sort of like Lord of the Rings, sort of the sword and sorcery story that's really bad. It's very confusing. It's very derivative. It doesn't feel original. I was learning how to write a book. I was learning how to tell stories. And so there's really nothing in it that inspires me to want to go back to it. The second one is a story that I used to tell as a counselor when I was at summer camp during the summer, sort of a campfire story. And years later, 10 years later, I came back and I looked at that story and I realized that what I wrote wasn't any good, but I loved the idea. I had the story in my head. So without even looking at what I wrote before, I took that story and wrote a whole new book that's called The Eyes of Kid Midas, about a kid who finds a pair of magic glasses on a mountaintop that give him complete control over the universe. And so it's a fun fantasy story. But the book that was published 10 years later is not the book that I wrote. It's not that second book. It's the same idea, same story, but a completely different book. So I did revisit the idea, but wrote a whole new book.
Okay, we understand. It's hard to write a book and actually be very good for everyone. I see Sophie has raised her hand.
Hi, so first of all, thank you so much for being here and giving us all this amazing opportunity. I just want to say I'm very grateful because you literally wrote one of my all-time favorite books. Scythe is the book that I recommend to everybody. When people tell me they're not a reader, I'm like, you haven't read this book yet, so you have to read it right now, and then you'll find out that maybe you are a reader.
Thank you. So I just want to thank you for that, because these books really, it's word of mouth. It's telling people about them. That's how these books have become popular. Movies have not been made of them yet. There is in the works. Universal is developing the script to be made into a movie. There's no telling whether it's going to get made though, but it's in the works. but it's all through word of mouth. It's all people telling their friends, you have to read this book. So thank you for that, because you're the ones who have made these books as successful as they are.
Thank you for writing them. I'll always keep recommending Scythe to everybody. So I have two questions. My first question would be, since the world is so divided right now, is there any book that you would recommend that if people read, it would bring them together, fiction or nonfiction?
I wish I had an answer for that. I wish I knew what book people could read that would end this divisiveness. I mean, I think that is the greatest threat to the human race right now, I think, is how divided we are. I mean, I know in the United States, there is such a division between liberals and conservatives, between people who were Trump supporters and people who were not. I mean, I was not. I was, very much against that. But the thing is, in the United States, there used to be an overlap of people. People where it's like a Venn diagram. Those two circles intersected, and you knew people who were on the other side, and you respected them. Now those two circles don't even interact. They don't even connect anymore. And a lot of that has to do, I think, with social media and the idea that we only hear the opinions that reinforce what we already believe. And I mean, in America, there's basically two separate Americas right now, two separate countries almost that don't interact at all. And it's scary. And I think it's the same thing is happening in Europe, and it's frightening to see. And I don't know what the solution is. I try to write books that pose questions about the problems. I do have some ideas and some stories about dealing with a world that is divided like that. And I'm considering how to tell the story. It's not so much about solving the solution as far as from a writing point of view. It's not as much about solving it as illuminating the problem and getting everybody to see that the problem isn't so much the other side. The problem is that there are two sides when there shouldn't be, that we should be united as a species rather than fighting against each other in this way. I sort of addressed that a little bit in my book series Unwind, which deals with what happens when you have a divided society, and when you're divided, you make very bad decisions. And it points towards that whole idea of making bad decisions when a society is divided. So, and that book series has become increasingly popular since it was published. It was published before. It was a series that I did before Scythe. And that one is more popular now even than when it was published, because it is so relevant to the problems of society right now.
Thank you so much for answering. And also, if I'm not mistaken, you majored in psychology in college. How was that experience, and how did that lead to you becoming a writer?
Well, I majored in psychology and theater. I double majored because I loved acting and I love theater and I love the human mind. I mean, psychology is the science of the human mind and behavior. Theater is the art of the human mind and behavior. So they go together very well. I knew that I wanted to be a writer when I was in college, but I didn't want to be an English major. I didn't want to be a literature major because, first of all, everybody who I knew who wanted to be a writer was majoring in literature. And also, I didn't like writing analytical essays. And everything about being a language major was about writing essays. I just wanted to write stories. I wanted to write fiction. So what I did was I majored in psychology and in theater, but I took every single creative writing class that was offered at my university, to the point that the head of the writing department personally knew me, as I was the kid who wasn't an English major, but yet was taking all the writing classes. And I felt it was a a good way to get into it. I mean, basically, when you're a writer, all the experiences you had, everything that you've learned goes into what you are as a writer. I mean, if you look at writers like Michael Crichton, who wrote Jurassic Park and just dozens and dozens of things. He created the series ER. He was a doctor. He was a medical doctor, and all of his stories somehow relate to that. So everything that your experiences in life lead you into what when you're a writer, it all feeds into it. That first book that I was talking about, the book, the hygiene book for teenage boys. You know why I got that job? I got the job because I had a degree in psychology. That was the thing that made them say, hey, he's a good writer and he has a degree in psychology. We'll hire him. So it all worked out.
Yeah, thank you for answering my questions. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Sophie. I see that someone wrote in the chat, I've always felt that Scythe world was a continuation of the Unwind world, where humanity has fixed some medical problems, more or less. Out of your Unwind characters, who would have been chosen by Scythe Faraday to be mentored?
I've never been asked that before. That's an interesting thought. Well, first of all, I do want to say, because of so many, it's very popular now for the universes of writers to be all put together. Like Marvel, there's the Marvel universe and the DC universe. And so people have started to think, oh, well, my stories are all in the same universe. No, they're not. I mean, Unwind is its own universe. It is not the same world as Scythe. It's a completely different reality. Rather than building on one universe, what excites me is coming up with different ones that don't interconnect. And so they're not connected, but it's a very good question. If they did connect, who in the Unwind world would Scythe Faraday choose to be a Scythe? It depends on where in the arc of their lives they would be chosen. I mean, early on, definitely not Connor, definitely not Lev, maybe Risa. I mean, if you're familiar with the characters in Unwind. But the thing is, by the time they get to the end of the series, they have all become very wise, and they have all become leaders. They have all become, in their own way, they've stepped up and have the personalities that could be Scythes. So I would say any of them by the end of the book, by the end of the series, Scythe Faraday could choose to be a Scythe, but probably not early on, because they have a lot to work through to get to the place where they would be the type of person who could be a Scythe.
Thank you for answering this interesting question. Now I see Rafa has raised her hand.
Yes, hi, I'm so happy to be here. I first read Scythe 3 years ago, I think, and it was and still is one of my favorite books. And I wanted to ask you, how long did it took you to write Scythe?
Scythe took about a year to write. And I wasn't writing on it continually, because the way that I work is I will work on a project for maybe 2 or 3 months, and then I'll burn out on it. Then I feel as if all my creative energy has just gone, and I'll put it aside and I'll work on something else. So usually what happens is, say I'm working on a book, and then suddenly I have this new idea for something that I'm really excited about. I'll switch gears and I'll start to write that. But then my rewrite notes will come back from an editor on yet another project. So I'll have to switch gears and work on that. And then I might get back to the first project. So it's bouncing around from one project to another. If you put all the days that I spent working on Scythe together, it comes out to be probably between 6 months and 9 months working, 6 to 8 hour days. But from start to finish of that first draft was about a little bit over a year. The longest one was the toll because it's, you know, almost 700 pages. That one, just by the mere fact of it being so long and the fact that it had to wrap up the entire series, that one took longer. That one took about a year and a half. And it was, what was frustrating about it is that Thunderhead came out, and the next day, the day after it was published, I was already getting emails from fans saying, I read Thunderhead in one day. Where is the third book? And it's like, you read it in one day, but it takes me longer than that to write it. So I got it out as quickly as I could, which was a year and a half.
I got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rafa. Now is Anna's turn.
Good evening. It's such an honor to meet you. First of all, because Skies was the first book I've ever read in English. Oh. And it kind of opened a door to a larger universe and a magical one, if I can say that, for me. But actually, my question is about Roxy, your last book that you published. And if I'm not wrong, you wrote it with your son, right?
Yes.
And my question is, how was it to write a book with your son?
Well, Roxy is actually the second book that I wrote with my son, Jared. The first one
was Dry, if I'm not wrong,
yeah,
right?
This one right here. And it's great writing with him. I mean, he is an excellent writer, very talented. And working with him was a bonding experience, you know, father-son bonding experience. I mean, you know, we have our disagreements about things in life, you know, as parents and you know, children do. But when it comes to writing, no, we were great collaborators together. And it was just fun getting together to write. And it wasn't like he would write one character and I would write another. We would go back and forth. So let's say I came up with the voice of a character and the style that the character, you know, story was told in. The next time that character was being represented, he would take it over. Or if he came up with a character, the next time we came to that character, I took it over, and we would go back and forth. So we got the chance to write from every character's point of view. Anytime we got to a point in the story where we needed to really think about where the story was going, we would sit either by Zoom or in person, because we wrote a lot of it before, you know, before the pandemic. We would sit and we would talk about where the story should go. We would come up with solutions to problems together. And then we would say, okay, so this chapter, here are all the things that have to happen in this chapter. Do you want to write this chapter or should I? And then, you know, we would decide who would write the chapter. Then the other one would do the revision. And then we would talk about it. And then we would get on to the next chapter. So it was a very smooth process writing together, and a fun process.
Thank you for answering.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Anna, for your question. I wanted to go back to Scythe because I wanted to know, why do they need to keep a journal?
The journal was my way of having the Scythes reflect on what they did, on the choices that they made. And I felt it was very important for the story, because I wanted to put all the thoughts about, you know, what does it mean when we have to end life to save the human race, and the philosophy of all of that. I mean, you know, all of those things, those moments where you sit back and think, why do we do what we do? Why is society the way it is? All those moments that we think about that, I wanted the Scythes to think about that too. And I wanted that to stand as an important part of the story, because I think that's part of what elevates the story, is the philosophical underpinnings of it. And the philosophy, a lot of that comes out in those journal entries. Also, those journal entries allowed me to give you some of the rules of the world and talk a little bit about the history that brought the world to where it was. So it served multiple purposes within the story. In the second book, I didn't have these sites doing the journals. I mean, the sites, of course, do the journals, but in the second book, I focused on basically the Thunderhead's journal. What the Thunderhead is thinking. The Thunderhead has these moments where it talks to us, the reader, about why it exists and what it thinks about everything that's going on. And so I felt that was very important too. I mean, for the same reason, a moment to reflect on the world and our purpose in it.
I know in the Thunderhead that you wrote a question. I kind of remember it. It sounds like how frustrating is to have so much power, yet to be so impotent to wield it when it counts. I found it so interesting because I know there was this not disagreement between Sight and Thunderhead, but practically the Thunderhead couldn't do anything because of the Sights. And I wanted to know if you know the answer to your own question.
Oh, if the Thunderhead doesn't know the answer, then how could I? If the Thunderhead was all powerful, then there wouldn't be a story. The Thunderhead could stop the Scythes and could prevent all of the bad stuff that happens, but then there wouldn't be a story. So the Thunderhead needed to be limited in that way. So the only thing it has no control over are the Scythes. So the Scythes are the problem. The Thunderhead isn't the problem in the world, because the Thunderhead, by its very nature, by definition, the Thunderhead cannot make a wrong decision. It cannot make a mistake. I mean, what it says is that everything that it does is the right decision, but some decisions are more right than others. But every decision is right. And so when you have an entity that always makes the right decision, then where do you have to go in a story? So there had to be people who were not controlled by the Thunderhead, or who the Thunderhead had no power to change their decisions. But yes, to be so powerful and yet not have the power when it counts, in a sense, that is kind of how we feel as the human race. We have so much power in this world, so much power to do good. And yet so many times we don't know how to use that power. So many times that power ends up being used not towards good, but towards I don't want to say evil, because I don't necessarily believe that there is absolute evil and absolute good, because things that even in good there is a dark side, and even in darkness there is a little bit of light. But the idea that we have all of this power and don't know how to wield it, I think, is very human. And I think that humanizes the Thunderhead. It makes the Thunderhead a much more sympathetic character, that it is so frustrated that it has all this power, but can't use it when it counts.
I kind of lost my idea. I wanted to say something. But I also have another question. Why Citra and Rowan can't visit their family while they are training for being the scythe?
Again, that is something that the Scythes decided, and it was really it is my decision. It's looking, when you look at building a world, you have to figure out what is the most logical choices that would be made. And I realized that if the characters could go and spend time or even live back at home during their training, that would make their training less successful. I mean, they had to be focused in what they were doing. And so I felt that for the purpose of the world and for the purpose of the story, we needed to get the families out of the way. We needed to focus on Citra and Rowan together and their relationship with each other and their relationship with first Scythe Faraday and then Scythe Curie and Scythe Goddard, and keep their families out of it, because then it just becomes all muddy and the story becomes unfocused. By the way, in Gleanings, there is a story about Citra's brother.
We can't wait to read it.
I don't want to give away, because I mean, you need to have read Scythe and Thunderhead to know why he becomes important in the story. So I don't want to give anything away that would be a spoiler, but he becomes an important character to the Scythedom. And actually, in the Toll, I had a whole storyline about Citra's brother, but it didn't go anywhere. And I realized that it did not fit within the Toll. But that doesn't mean it still didn't happen. And so when writing Gleanings, the first story that I had was based on all of the parts of Ben's story, Citra's brother's story, that I pulled out of the Toll, and that became its own side story.
We're so happy to hear that, because I know this is my personal thought, that I like more side character than main characters. And it's very interesting that you have this book about some of the side characters and their own thoughts.
Well, the thing about the main characters are the hardest to write, because they are the heroes, and the hero's journey in every single book is almost exactly the same. And so writing the hero in the story is the hardest character to write, because you're trying to make them unique and you're trying to make them different, but yet all heroes are basically the same. But in all the other characters, you get to have a lot more fun. And so even though you relate and identify with Citra and Rowan and you care about them, from the writing point of view, the characters that are the most fun to write, are all the other characters.
I see now that Yonela wrote in the chat that she read the Einwind series, and she said she's her favorite dystopian series. She loves Risa so much. And she was also in a wheelchair and related to her so much in Unholy. Einwind inspired her to write her own dystopian book, and also read Scythe and loved it. She loved the darkness that you bring in your books, and for her, Unwind was the first book that really fits in the horror genre too. And in her opinion, every dystopian should be scary like that. And she also has a question: Will Einwind be published in Romania? Actually, we don't know this so far, but we will ask the people who should know the answer to this question.
Yes, if I would love the Unwind series to be published in Romania, so I would be overjoyed if that happened. So
fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
I see that Patricia has again another question.
Yeah, sorry, I'm resistant. So my question was, if you would be a site, what name would you give yourself? So what would your site name be?
And I've been asked that before, and I decided that I would be, one of my favorite authors is Kurt Vonnegut. I would be Scythe Vonnegut. He was a science fiction author whose works are considered literature. They don't get put aside in the science fiction section. His works are considered, literature. His stories are mind-bending and funny and very unique, and really, I think, influenced my writing style. So if I were to Scythe, I would choose to be Scythe Vonnegut.
Thank you so much for answering.
Thank you, Patricia.
I put Scythe Vonnegut in one of the stories in Gleanings.
Amazing.
He's not the main character, he's a side character, but when you read that, that would be me.
We'll keep that in mind. Thank you, Patricia. Karina?
I also wanted to ask you, what character from Scythe do you think had the biggest development?
Which character in Scythe develops the most? I would have to say, in the whole series, I would have to say Grayson. Grayson has the largest character arc, from being a very, very ordinary, unnoticeable kid to being the religious leader of the world. Basically, he goes from one extreme to the other, and has to. And every choice that he makes, everything that he does, by the time he gets to the third book, has global ramifications. So he becomes he's a very important character, and I think his character has the greatest change from the beginning to the end.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karina.
You're welcome.
I wanted to ask you again about Scythe, because I heard that there will be a movie or a TV series, I'm not sure. And I wanted to know how it's going with it.
Well, at this point in time, I have numerous projects in development. And in development means that the studio bought it and they've hired writers to write the script. Sometimes I'm involved with that, sometimes I'm not. With Dry, I'm working on the script with Jared. And that one, we have private investors who want to do that. It was originally with Paramount Studios, but now it's with private investors who want to make the movie. Unwind is in development with Universal Television, and that one they just hired the writer for. We're very excited. The Universal is very excited, and so that is in active development. Where we're waiting on that first draft of the script for the pilot TV episode. Not sure whether it'll be on network or if it will be streaming like on Netflix and places like that, but we'll see. And Scythe is also in development with Universal, but as a movie. And Steven Spielberg is in charge of the project. And they also just hired a new writer to write a new script. And so we're waiting on that script. There have been already 2 different scripts written for Scythe that the studio was not happy with. But now they have a new writer writing a brand new script, and hopefully this script will be the movie that they want to make. No guarantee. In the entertainment industry, there's no guarantee. No matter how many writers they put on a project, there's never a guarantee that it's going to get made until the studio says, we're making it. So we'll see. I keep my fingers crossed, but I don't bank on it. I don't assume that it's going to happen, and I'll just keep on writing until they finally start to make movies out of them.
We hope to see them on the big screen soon.
Thank you.
The time is almost up. We have time for only one question or 2 maybe. So I see Lavinia raised her hand. So I let her speak now.
Thank you. At first I wanted to ask you if you had any actors in mind who would play the characters, but now I'm thinking I'm probably going to find out at one point about that. So now I'm thinking, did you have any real life inspiration for the characters? Do you know people in your life who are similar, who display the same ethics?
Not specifically, because I try not to have characters inspired by actual people. I want the characters to be their own individuals, but I'll take traits from different people that I know and give them to characters. When it comes to casting as who I would like to see in the roles, I also try not to do that, because then you get stuck in your mind seeing a character a certain way. But I could not help it with Scythe Curie. I couldn't help but imagine Helen Mirren or Meryl Streep as Scythe Curie. And it would be so cool if one of them gets to do Scythe Curie.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Lavinia. Thank you, Neal, for answering. It seems like our time is up. And I wanted to say thank you, Neal, for joining us. Thank you again.
You're very welcome. It has been an honor to get the chance to speak with my Romanian fans. And I look forward to doing this again soon. And I hope you guys keep on reading and spread the word.
We hope to see you maybe someday in person.
Yes, that would be wonderful.
Thank you again, everyone, for joining. You can find Neal's books on Carturesti website. You have Scythe in Romanian and also Thunderhead. The third book will be out soon. It's on its way, so be patient. And also you can find the English version also on Carturesti. I only have Thunderhead and the Toll. We'll get Scythe soon. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice evening.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.